Hello friends and welcome to another video. Today we're doing something fun. We're going to be building a display diorama for my 1/12 scale Mezco style Dark Knight movie trilogy figures. So this is something I've been working on for several weeks now. As far as the figures are concerned, these are mostly customs. These are the Soap Studios Catwoman and Batman. That Batman has a Mafex head on it for anyone who's curious. I love soft goods and I love the realism that you get from them. You know, my collection is kind of geared towards looking like miniature Hot Toys, essentially. So I've been building out this Dark Knight trilogy collection. I've got somewhere around 12 or 13 figures, either finished or just waiting for heads to be painted, a few other details, etc. Initially, I had these kind of just lined up on the top of my display shelves, and it served the purpose for a little while, but I really felt like they needed a better showcase. And so I decided what I'm going to do is build a diorama for them. And it's going to be unlike one that I've ever done. Because there are so many of these figures, I need something to display them all, but I also wanted to be sort of scene specific in certain ways. And the solution I came up with for that is to do a tiered display diorama. We're going to do something where on the bottom, we're going to have the Batcave from the Dark Knight, which was like in the shipping yard. They get into the shipping container and they take the elevator inside of it down and they end up in this very parking garage-esque version of the Batcave. And this comes out of the floor, etc. The middle tier is going to be more of like a sidewalk maybe, or a street. And then the top tier will be a rooftop, and that's where we're going to have the bat signal, probably Batman standing on the rooftop, Officer John Blake up there, a few other figures. So this is going to be a really fun exercise, and I'm excited to have you all along for the trip. So next we're going to take a look at the sketch I came up with and then get to building. So here's a look at the sketch I worked up that I'm going to be working from. I've got 14.5 inches of depth to work with. So that's going to be from the front to the back. The entire shelf itself is 20 inches wide, but I've got about 18 inches to work with of actual live area. Now the Batcave portion of it is probably going to house the Bat Pod. So I'm going to need the most depth out of that. So I'm making that 7.5 inches. It's also going to have that Batman armory thing, probably somewhere in the middle. I'm going to have, I think, Bruce, Lucius, Alfred, and maybe Selina on the Bat Pod. Then we're going to have the mid-level up here, and that's probably going to have Harvey Dent, maybe Ra's al Ghul. Then on the rooftop, we're going to have Bruce on his first night out. That'll be the Mafex version. Bane, John Blake, Batman. Here's a side profile of it so you can see kind of what I'm planning. On the front, I'm going to have the look of that Batcave where it's concrete. I don't think it actually has any kind of pour seams in the floor, so this will be solid. Then we'll have some of those seam lines, and this is all going to be painted to look like the Batcave in the Dark Knight. Then up here we'll do a sidewalk, and then we'll do a brick facade on the building part of it. So this won't be dissimilar to that NECA street scene diorama, but it's going to have, rather than being a street and then two tiers of a building, it's going to be essentially three different pieces. So next up, we're going to measure and cut the foam and then get to magnetizing it. So here I'm using pink insulation foam that I got at Home Depot. These come in sheets of 24 inches by 24 inches. They're an inch thick. It's dense stuff. It's very sturdy. It's easy to cut. And it's really great for building dioramas out of because the textures that you can get out of it really mimic building materials very well. Here I'm adding magnets to it. When you magnetize the different segments of it, it makes it easier to construct, to paint, to disassemble, to move, etc. Okay, so here we are doing a test fit on the shelf, and this doesn't have as much room as I thought it would. In my head I was like, oh, I'll put this there, I'll put that there, that's gonna be great. It's running out of space quickly, so but that's okay. I mean, this is fitting what I wanted it to. One thing I didn't take into consideration was the height of the armory. So what I'm actually going to do is cut into the base here and recess it so that it's flush with the ground here. So I think that'll look cool because that thing came up out of the ground in the movie. I ended up making this back piece here 6 inches because I realized it would be much more believable in the environment if it came up to about the same height as the figures. but the next level is actually gonna sit flush with the top of this. So you can see that support piece is shorter there. I don't have as much room as I thought vertically. I guess I wasn't really taking those measurements into consideration with the height of the figures. So rather than being 5 inches from there to the next tier, I think I'm only gonna do about 3 so that there's still plenty of room for those other figures on the top shelf. That's what's next. Just building this thing out more and cutting a hole for that armory. Okay, so I got the base cut out to stick this in. It's not pretty underneath, but it doesn't need to be because you won't see it. This kind of stuff is really hard to like cut out. What I should have done is just cut straight through it and then kind of wedged it so it didn't go down all the way. I think that would have worked just fine, but I didn't think of that until I was pretty much done. So plus I think the hole is a little too wide now because I've been shimmying around and whatnot. But that will house the armory, and then this just clicks on right there with the magnets. So next up, I'm going to keep building the back of it and then get to paint. Okay, so we got the build completed now. There were a lot of starts and stops along the way. I miscalculated the height here, the depth on some stuff. So I ended up kind of freestyling a lot of this toward the end here, and I deviated from the drawing a bit in terms of like the measurements and whatnot, but the overall look is what I was going for. This bit will all be concrete, and then these will be brick here. And this is modular, so this comes off, and then this is attached via magnets. So this is gonna be the brick part. And then here, I had this strip of stuff that I got at Home Depot. I think it's just kind of some kind of like crown molding type of trim. These are just some strips of balsa wood that I got at the craft store. So this is all going to be painted gray to look like concrete. This might be brick as well, I think. So the next step is going to be to paint this all black. And then I'm going to go in with some gray and do the concrete. I'll use red and browns and stuff for the brick, etc. Here's a look at the paints I'll be using. This was just a big cheap tube of black that I got at the craft store. It really doesn't matter what kind you use. I'll also be using some of this Craft Smart, which is another just cheap craft store brand. And I have Deco Art for some of the brick stuff. Again, cheap craft store stuff. I don't think any of these were above $2. Maybe this one because it's a little bit bigger. You know, you get a lot of questions typically about what kind of paint I'm using. So here are the brands I'm using. And then other than that, I just use like a large brush. Probably this one. This again is something I got at like an art supply store many years ago that I use for large painted areas. I also need to put the brick textures in here as well as like some of the, you know, for like the sidewalk, like the seams in the concrete. For that, I'm literally just going to use a ruler and a mechanical pencil. Now I do talk about recycling and minimizing waste a lot on this channel. And you may be going, but Ibrahim, look at all this foam you're using. Look at all this plastic you're using. Yes, I save the offcuts. This stuff is polyurethane foam, and polyurethane is one of the main ingredients in plastic. This stuff is not something that I want to be putting into the garbage. So I'll save this kind of stuff for rubble, for later dioramas. If I don't have a use for it, I do have a local service called Ridwell. They're in the Pacific Northwest here where I live. And their service picks up hard to recycle items. That's just a little something I want to pepper in because I'm always talking about recycling and things, but clearly using products that are harmful waste if not disposed of properly. So just want to throw that in there. Okay, while some of the black paint is still drying, I'm going to go ahead and start on the bricks here. As you can see, I've made all the brick textures using the pencil, and I've mixed a little bit of brown and some of that brick red paint that I have. I always do a little test first, somewhere insignificant, to get some of the paint off the brush. And then essentially we're going to do some dry brushing, which is basically just taking the brush and kind of dragging it lightly across the surface. And you see what that does? It picks up the raised parts of the texture and leaves the recessed parts to stay dark. And then eventually, once this is all done, we're going to go in with some grout looking stuff to get in between the bricks and make it look more authentic. Something I really love about this material, using it for dioramas, is that it mimics the textures of real like cement and concrete and things like that super well. And one thing I do like to do is have a little extra paint on the brush and pick a few bricks and just sort of make them stand out a bit more. You know, every brick wall looks different and has different colored bricks throughout. So by making a couple pop a little more, you just get a little bit more variety out of it. Now I've got a little bit of the red and brown that I mixed together left. So I'm gonna put a little bit of yellow in there, just a tiny bit. And I'm gonna mix that in. And it's not a huge difference in color, but now we're gonna have just kind of one more variation to pop in there. That again just adds to the kind of visual texture of the piece. Makes it a little bit more interesting to look at. Okay, so next we're gonna mix a grout color for this brick. This is totally subjective, so there's no right or wrong way to do this. Basically, I'm taking gray, white, and yellow and mixing very small amounts together. Yeah, see, there's too much white in there, so I'm actually gonna pull in a bit of this orangish color that I made. I'm gonna add water. And we want a bit of a runny consistency. You see it kind of runs like that. We're gonna take that and just wipe it across the brick. And actually, that's a little too thick. I want a little more runny than that, so it really gets into the crevices. Take a towel and dab it. And that just kind of weathers it that much more and makes it a little bit more believable. It does kind of lighten the brick around it as well, which is okay because we want this to look like a building that's been there for a while. You know, Gotham is an old city, right? You see the difference from this end to this end? So yeah, it just really gives it a lot more character. Now painting the concrete is going to be very similar to what we just did with the bricks, where I'm going to mix some gray, some white, and some yellow together. Yeah, I'm going to put a little bit of black in there as well, just to darken it up a bit more. That's starting to come together. Now it's important when you're doing this stage to not have too much paint on your brush, because then it just comes out looking too light. You really want to catch those high points while still maintaining the depth from the black. Also switch up the directions you go in so you don't get too many directional brush strokes happening, because that can take away from the realism of it as well. This is one of the more tedious parts of the process, and a lot of times you'll have to do a couple passes. So if you let your brush really get dry, it doesn't end up doing a lot, but it gets closer to achieving the look that you want. When the paint hits these corners like that and you get a little bit more of a deposit and then it is thinner throughout, I just love that. I love how that looks. It's so cool how you can take this material and just approximate an entirely different material with it. I just think that that's like such a dope thing about using this stuff for dioramas. And as always, I got to take the opportunity to shout out Al Figures. His channel here on YouTube is how I learned to make these. He's been doing this for a long time, and he makes some really great dioramas and is always super generous with his information on those. This is the part I was most excited about, is doing this kind of crown molding material here. I've never dry brushed this stuff before, and I was just very excited to see how it comes together. And again, I like to go and cross patterns because it makes it so you don't see the brush streaks. Okay, now I'm trying to do the kind of brownish color for the walls, and this is a really hard color to mix. A lot of trial and error. I finally got to a color that I think will kind of work. That's looking about how I want it to. What did you all think of this like kind of Batcave 2.0 in The Dark Knight? I thought it was a cool idea. I personally love the Batcave as an element of Batman, and that was actually one of my favorite parts of the Batman, was that it was such a cool take on the cave being like a disused subway terminal that was part of the Wayne Tower building. I think the coolest iteration of the cave in that trilogy, though, was probably in The Dark Knight Rises. I love how those platforms came up out of the water, and it was like they made good on what they said they were going to do. Rebuild the foundations in the southeast corner. I would love to make a dio of that. If I ever end up finding the Hot Toys The Bat, the sort of like plane helicopter thing, drone thing that he had in that movie, if I can find one for a not ridiculous price, I shouldn't say ridiculous, it's priced for what it's worth. I mean, it's an amazing piece of like design and you know, engineering on a toy level. But that one, you know, the Hot Toys one, it is 1/12 scale, because they just, you know, if they made it actually 1/6 scale, it would be like the size of a person's garage probably. So that would fit with my collection, and I think it'd be really cool to build that platform, make it look like it came up out of the water. Maybe have some water streaming off of it, like in place, made from like some silicone or some clear resin or something. Okay, so now that this sidewalk is basically done, the last step I want to do is add a little bit of white to both this and the rooftop, just to bring out some of the highlights. I'm going to take a bit of white, and I'm just going to let it mix in with the concrete colors that I already have in there, because it's okay if it doesn't need to be pure white. In fact, that might be a little too bright. So we're going to mix that. We just want to dry brush it just lightly. I feel like Bob Ross. Shout out to Bob Ross. Notice how this just kind of brings out a little bit more of the detail, and also just kind of gives it like a heightened sense of weathering. Like the wind and the dirt and everything are just kind of beating against these ridges over the years. Maybe a bird took a doo-doo right there. In fact, let's make that little bird doo-doo. A little bit of bird doo-doo right there. You know what I mean? All right, so this is all painted up now. The last bit I want to do is add a backdrop to it. Now, ideally, I will probably get something printed, like a cityscape, but my Soap Studios Batman figures came with these backdrops here. So I've got two of them. They are the same image, but I think I can get away with, you know, kind of overlapping them a little bit. If they sit about like that, should be just enough space. So I think what I'm gonna do is take some adhesive magnets and stick them to the front of these, and then put some magnets on the back of these pieces. So here we are, all wrapped up on the shelf. As you can see, there's still a few empty spots. I'm still working on finishing a few figures, but this is how they'll all be displayed, and I'm very pleased with the turnout on this one. I will be doing a separate video on all of these figures once they're completed. You know, we'll do a sort of a mini collection tour of this display itself, so you can see the different figures, how I made them, what went into them, etc. But I think this was just a really great way to display all of them. Previously, they were on top of this shelf, and they were all kind of lining the top, almost like they were on a rooftop, but it didn't really pop the way I wanted it to. They were kind of hard to see because they're about 6 feet in the air at that point. I love having figures in an environment, and you know, you don't really see a lot of dioramas like this. Typically it's a full scene, and that's usually what I make, but I'm really pleased with the notion of making a tiered display like this that will show all of the figures within one display, because usually if you have like a single environment diorama, feasibly you can only put like, you know, a few characters in, and or you know, you're making a single scene with all of them, and you got to figure out a place for each of them. Those are really dope too, but I really wanted to kind of do the more, I guess, more vanilla poses with these, because I am really proud of how these have turned out. Now, say what you will about the Soap Studios figures, and they have problems. I think the Batman suit just looks so dope in this scale as one single outfit and not segmented by articulation joints. And so, yeah, I'm just thrilled to have that like that. You know, I love this trilogy. I even love the third one, warts and all. I know the Batman is out now, and that's kind of the new wave, but I'm still rocking super hard with this trilogy. So I really wanted to have a nice representation of it on my shelf. I'm just really stoked that I thought of doing this. I was inspired by some dioramas I've seen on Instagram. I saw somebody who had basically this cave in like a fish tank sort of setup, or some kind of Maji case display or something. That really kind of kicked off this idea, because I thought, what if I did that, but then I had a way to display the rest of the figures above them? My goal with these is really to kind of have like a scaled down hot toy style figure. So these are all soft goods, with the exception of First Night Out Bruce on the top left there. That's a Mafex. I love hot toys. I love 6 scale figures. I have several, but I don't have the space and the budget for as many as I would want. And also, I like to have a hand in making my own stuff. Like, I don't enjoy just buying it and putting it on the shelf as much as I do when it's like I had to kind of put my own spin on it at the very least, or make it out of a bunch of disparate pieces. So let's move in a little closer here and take a look at it in more detail. Now, I actually ended up painting the top of that armory to match the rest of the concrete look. As you can see, Two-Face is no face at this moment, which is what my wife just said when she looked at it. There's the custom Joker, which I do have a video on painting that head in the channel. That is a custom Ra's al Ghul that I made. And in the back there we have a John Blake in the works with the Movie Masters bat signal. And then of course Alfred and Lucius, both customs that I made, as well as Bruce. That has a maniple head on it for anyone who's curious. It's actually scaled for like SH Figure Arts and Mafex, but I kind of fudged it to make it work with this display. So that'll conclude this video. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button. If you want to see more content like this, feel free to click subscribe and join me as I create more dioramas, more custom figures, and more vehicles. At the beginning of this video, you'll have seen a trailer for my graphic novel Retroactive. It's kind of a spy-fi thriller mashup of James Bond and Groundhog Day. That's available at your local bookstore, at Barnes & Noble, and on Amazon. There's a link in the description below. Also in the description below, you'll find links to some of the supplies I used in this. If you have any questions about the supplies or anything in this video, any part of the process, feel free to drop a comment below. And until next time, keep your head on swivel.